Hey guys, it's me again. It's been a long time since I posted, I think like a year or two. But yeah, so today I'm going to be reading the last chapter of A Tale Dark and Grim by Adam Gidwitz. So let's get started. So this chapter is technically says the end, but then it's not actually the end. So yeah, so the end, almost. Quick, Gretel whispered through her tears. Bring me his head. Hansel looked to the corner where it had come to rest. He went to it and gingerly, trying not to look, he picked it up. Then he brought it to his sister. From her pocket, Gretel had taken out the warlock's twine. It was nearly nothing, just a frayed strand, no thicker than a hair. Hold his head on, she said. So Hansel put his father's head on his neck. Then Gretel wrapped the twine around it and fumblingly tied it. As she untied it, the twine snapped. She let it fall to the ground. They watched the skin on their father's neck creep together, healing before their eyes, but he did not move. Gretel began to cry harder. Hansel cried too. We forgive you, Gretel said. We do, Hansel agreed. Their tears fell on him. After he moved, Gretel nearly threw him off her. She was so surprised the king groaned. Father? Father? Gretel cried. He groaned again. His eyes opened slowly. Hello, he said. Hansel and Gretel fell upon him. Oh, father, you're all right. You're all right, Gretel said. We wished we hadn't had to do that. Hansel said, but we did have to. He took hold of them both. I understand, he said, and then, blinking at them as if he had just walked into the sunlight after a long time in the darkness, he said, I understand, my children. Just then, they heard footsteps in the hall. The queen's. Hansel looked at his father covered in blood. Father, he said, did mother know you were the dragon? No, their father replied. I didn't know myself until just now. I just kept waking up in strange places. I really didn't think I was chef. Okay, get in the wardrobe. So their father got in the wardrobe. Just as he did, their mother entered the room. Did you have a nice time praying, Mother? Hansel said. Asked. She took her children in her arms. Oh, I can barely pray. I think of only the dragon and of our poor kingdom. Gretel said, What if we told you, Mother, that we knew who the dragon was, and that the only way to stop the dragon would be to kill that person? The queen looked back and forth between her two children. You know who it is? You know who it is? Then we must do it right away. No matter who it is? Hansel asked. No matter who it is. Its father, the children said at once. The queen gasped. She fell to the floor and wept bitterly. After a long time, she said, If you're sure it's him, if you can prove it, then yes. I couldn't do it, but I would understand. The children looked at each other, and then said at the same moment, Are we glad you said that? They walked over to the wardrobe and let their father out, all covered in blood. The queen screamed. Then Hansel and Gretel explained it all. The queen wept and beat the king's chest with her hands. But after, she laughed through her tears and threw her arms around all of them. Then she wept some more. You are all okay? She asked as tears streamed down her face. We're all okay. Together, they said together, and they all held one another, one big, happy, sad, complicated family, as tightly as they always should have. The end. Nearly. I'm sorry. Before I tell you the very truly, absolutely end, I've got to interject one last time, for fun, or to help you, if I can, though I wouldn't count on it. Why did this projectile beheading have to happen? Why something so awful, so gruesome, so upsetting? Why was their father the dragon, and did they really, really have to cut off his head? And what about everything that came before that? All this blood and this pain? What sense does any of it make? Is there any sense at all? I don't know. I mean, what does understanding have to do with returning to your family? Or cutting off your finger have to do with turning into a wild beast? What does an old crone with a shackle on her leg have to do with faithful Joannes? Or three black ravens with cages full of white doves? Why is the moon creepy and cold when the stars are bright and kind? Why was the widow a good parent and yet no more able to protect Gretel and the bad parents? What did all this mean? These strange, scary, dark, grim tales? I told you already. I don't know. Besides, even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. You see, to find the brightest wisdom, one must pass through the darkest zones. And through the darkest zones, there can be no guide. No guide, that is, but courage. As Hansel and Gretel and the Queen and King held one another, the final golden fumes of the dragon drifted from the chimney and out onto the morning air. The gold mingled with the sunrise and slowly suffused itself over the whole kingdom. As people woke that morning, they saw it. They were drawn out of their houses by it, by the beautiful golden smoke that floated beneath the clouds. They followed it, without wondering, without saying a word. They followed it, as if they knew, upon seeing it, that something bad had happened, something important, and not to find out what it was. All they had to do was follow the golden smoke. Along the roads, the subject of Grimm walked silently toward the source of the beautiful golden light, toward the castle. You never told us, the queen said to her children as they sat on the floor of their bedroom, blood winding through the crevices of the stones, collecting into little pools. You never told us where you've been and what you've done. Hansel and Gretel looked at each other. You don't have to tell us, their father said gently. Not now, not ever, if you don't want to. Hansel held his sister in his gaze. Her eyes, ocean blue, sun bright, were happier, clearer than he had seen them in a long, long time. Gretel returned her brother's stare. He looked unburdened, lighter, and he looked older than he had ever looked. Not old with care, old with wisdom. We can tell you now, Gretel said, and so they did. Hansel started with what Jonas had told to him about the old king lying on his deathbed. Gretel planned to pick up as soon as she and Hansel entered the story, but just then there was a knock on the king and queen's chamber door. Yes, said the king. A servant poked his head. Excuse me, your majesty, he said. Then he saw the blood on the king. Your majesty, are you all right? I'm fine, said the king. What is it? I, uh, the servant, named Willem, shook his head and tried not to stare at the blood. Your people, he went on. They're standing outside the castle. What? What people? The subjects. Which subjects? The queen demanded. All of them, your majesties. The king and queen leaped to their feet. But why? The queen asked. I'm not sure, said the servant. I think it might have to do with the golden smoke. What smoke? Said the queen. The dragon, Gretel whispered to her. What? The king said. Hansel gave him a meaningful look. Oh, he said. Right. He turned to his wife. Should we go down? He looked concerned. The queen looked at her children. It's okay, Hansel said. Gretel nodded, but the queen said, No, let them wait. But your majesty, the servant said, they're calling for you. Let them call, the queen replied. The king added, try to keep them entertained. The servant was about to protest again, but on seeing the expressions on his master's faces, thought better of it. He closed the door. Hansel and Gretel smiled at their parents, and Hansel started again. In the hallway, the other servants crowded around Wilhelm. What are we supposed to do? One asked. Keep them entertained, Wilhelm said. Somehow. What are they saying in there? Another asked. I think I hear the children talking. So the servants leaned their heads against the door. Hansel was telling of the portrait of the golden princess. Quick, said Willem, go get everyone you can, every servant in the castle. So one of them did, as the others continued to listen at the door. When all the servants were assembled, Willem said, Jacob and I, he gestured to the servants to his right, are going to listen to the door and relay everything we hear. Then you pass it down as best as you can to the next servant and keep passing it all the way out to the balcony. The royal crier will stand on the balcony and relay it all to the subjects. He turned it to the kitchen staff. Go and make food for everybody. For everybody, the chef exclaimed. Everybody. And so the plan was carried out. Hansel and Gretel told the whole tale from the old king's deathbed all the way through the beheading of their father. As the servants related, as best as they could, down the halls of the castle and out to the royal crier, who in turn related to the people of the kingdom of Grimm. The storyteller took all through the day and into the early evening, and then as the stars were beginning to twinkle, but before the creeping moon had made an appearance in the southern sky, Hansel and Gretel finished. The family hugged one another once more, very tightly, and stood up. They stretched their arms a length and then went to the door. The servants had retreated to the opposite wall of the corridor when the king came out. He asked what they were all doing. Willem said that they were ready to take them down to the great balcony, where the subjects were still waiting. They had been fed. You fed them, the queen said. That's very clever of you. Willem bowed. What did you tell them? The king asked. Willem rubbed his hand nervously over his hair. He looked at Jacob and the other servants. They all looked at the floor. He said, We told them what Hansel and Gretel told you, and about the adventures. The queen raised her eyebrows. And let me be the first to congratulate the children, he added quickly, on the successful vanishing of the dragon. We are more grateful than words can express. and he said it like he meant it. The queen looked at the king, but the king only smiled. Fine, he said. Well done. That's fine. He, too, said it like he meant it. Then the royal family followed the line of servants down to the balcony. The subjects of Kingdom of Grimm were spread out before the balcony in dozens, sitting on the ground, eating the suppers that the kitchen had provided them, and listening to the end of the story with rapt attention. I understand, the crier was saying as the king and queen and Hansel and Gretel emerged from behind him. I understand, my children. The roar erupted from the subjects. The crier, thinking they were roaring for his telling of the story, took a little bow, but then he saw the royal family. Quickly he retreated. The subjects' cheers were deafening. Hansel and Gretel stood before them and took it all in. They smiled. The king raised his hands. The subjects quickly grew quiet. I have something I must say, he announced. These two children have killed the dragon. Killed the dragon when everyone else had tried to, and everyone else had failed. The subjects cheered wildly. The king raised his hands again for the silence. The dragon would have destroyed this kingdom altogether, he went on. It would have left it in an empty ruin. He paused. He tried to swallow down a thickness that had developed in his throat. I would have left it in an empty ruin. I didn't know what I was doing, of course. I did not know I was the dragon. But the dragon, I would have destroyed this kingdom if Hansel and Gretel had not stopped me. The people of Grimm stared. I can no longer be king. How could I, after what I have done? In the kingdom of Grimm, not a single person made a sound. I am passing my crown on, and I ask my wife to do the same. We will pass our crowns to our children. The murmur swept through the crowd. To Hansel and Gretel? To children? Yes, the king declared. They are children, but they are the wisest, bravest children I have ever known. My wife and I will help them as long as they need us. But, and here he held up his hands, and all murmured stopped. There's wisdom in children, a kind of knowing, a kind of believing that we, as adults, do not have. There's a time when a kingdom needs its children, these children, King Hansel and Queen Gretel. Total silence. They will, of course, marry other people, the queen added. Still total silence. And then in the crowd a tall man from Washens, the bald one from the boxer's nose, shouted, "But they're just little ki—" But before he could finish, someone else called out. It was a young man with long hair and fresh raw scar on his face, the one from the tavern. He had climbed upon the shoulders of a friend. Hansel and Gretel saw him. His face was shining. "He saved us from the dragon," he cried. "Long live Hansel! Long live King Hansel! Long live Queen Gretel!" The people of Grimm gazed up as at Hansel and Gretel. There was something in what the king had said about children, about these children. "Long live King Hansel!" the young man shouted again. And then someone else took up the cheer. "Long live Queen Gretel!" Another cried it, and another, more and more, more and more, rising up into a tumult all around Hansel and Gretel. "Long live King Hansel! Long live Queen Gretel!" As they looked out over the people of Grimm, their father leaned down to them and said, "These subjects are your children now." Their mother said, "You must take care of them." "Better," their father added, "than we took care of you." Hansel and Gretel turned to him, smiling, gesturing at the crowd, said, "It looks like you did all right." Gretel reached out and took her father's hand and then her mother's. The subjects continued to cheer till their throats strained and the sky seemed to whirl. "Long live King Hansel!" they cried. "Long live King Gretel! Long live Hansel and Gretel!" And you know what? They did. The end.